How are you?
I'm great, Chris. Welcome.
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for joining us. I know it's right at quitting time where you are, so I appreciate you making the time on your schedule to join with us tonight.
Well, ironically, I just got home from elk hunting, so
Well, were you successful? That's the big question.
yes, I was.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I always say a split second after you pull the trigger, the work begins and the season is over.
Oh boy, howdy. And if you're successful, boy, does it work? Does the work really begin?
Yes, it certainly does, and it's worth it.
Yeah,
It's
and
worth
the
it
older
every
you get, the
time.
more you realize just how much your joints hate you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, in the interest of starting on time and respecting your time, Chris, I'm going to do a quick introduction here. As you've all seen, we do record these calls for future posterity. Our membership, just under 100 members right now, most of them are actively campaigning. This is that last push before the election next week. So I figured we'd have a bunch that would be maybe either joining us later or watching the video after it posts, which is commonly the case. So just know that this is going to be out there for posterity's sake. And I'm excited, Chris. Truly, I'm excited. And part of the reason being is, you know, that I sat on city council with Mayor Mark Johnson, and you have a personal connection with him. And yeah, so I sat on his, I chaired his homeless task force. And I know that in every election cycle, as long as I can remember, affordable housing and homelessness are always right up there. And everyone runs because they're going to fix the problem. And they think that by getting in government office, they're going to fix the problem. And I have my own ideas based on research on that. And I know that you have discovered much the same. So that's why I'm excited for your presentation tonight. And I will ask a lot of questions afterwards. And I think every person who's running for office, helping someone run for office, or just wants to be an educated, informed citizen and voter, you need to understand the dynamics of what's going on. And your background is incredible, Chris. I have to say, having been a child in the foster care system, and I know that there are certain ways you're not supposed to speak about that sort of stuff, so I'll let you introduce that part of your story. But I know that you worked under Dr. Ben Carson in Region 9, Secretary Ben Carson. And that's quite a task. California, Arizona, Hawaii, Nevada, US territories, and Commonwealths in the Pacific. That is a huge task and undertaking. So I know you've got insights that no one else is going to have in this. And working with Washington Trust Charitable Foundation as the Community Solutions Advisor gives me so much hope and inspiration for what we need to do as community members to really move the dial on these very important issues. So with that, I'm going to give you the floor. Tell us what you can, fill in any gaps about your background that you think is going to be relevant. And I'll let you get back to butchering elk as soon as we finish up. But let's start with that. And again, thanks so much for joining.
You bet. Well, the elk was taken care of. It's already at the butcher, so I don't have to worry about that.
Excellent.
I would say, for me personally, my background, my story, you know, I don't shy away from any confrontation. I don't shy away from the truth. I don't shy away from what I consider nonfiction. Because in my opinion, legacy is what you do with the litmus test of what you do on this planet. So whether everything you do personally affects your family and your kids at some point down the road, as well as your friends. That said, you know, I had grown up in the foster care system, aged out in Spokane, Washington. I grew up on a small dairy farm, and I worked for a lot of big dairy farms up on Elk, Washington. I went to Riverside High School. I ended up aging out at age 19, 20, and I went straight into the Job Corps up in Curlew, Washington, or Wakanda, Washington. And I ended up graduating with working through 5 trades. I worked fire crew. I got what they call a red card, so I can be working on fire crew and lead sawyer. So that the 1988-89, which you would all know very well in Montana, was the year of the Yellowstone fire. So I spent a tremendous amount of time in Yellowstone flying into what they call Division D. So we had to be flown in by helicopter and dropped off. So it was a pretty tough area. Then we do our R&R in Phillipsburg, Montana. From there, I went straight into college, literally, into Spokane Community College. I graduated with criminal justice, fire science, and a liberal arts degree. So I found myself not liking high school at all. And I loved college because I love the challenge of brain. I can actually learn on my own speed. And from there, I went into Eastern Washington University. Later on, graduated with a degree in interdisciplinary studies in KED Psych. I originally was going to go become a teacher. I was going to be endorsed to teach K through 12 special education with an elementary emphasis and reading. So my focus was to go live up in a bush in Alaska. And I went up there and worked for a while, and the rest is kind of history. I ended up working full time in the field of social services, working with criminally insane, mentally ill, developmentally delayed, autistic, bipolar, dual diagnosed, co-occurring disorders, kind of the wider gamut. And I found myself being attracted to working with the really, really tough populations, to where I had to really think. I mean, I'm a big guy. I was going to be, my focus was federal law enforcement, and I wanted to become a federal cop, fish and game and other stuff. But my size, I'm a big guy. I'm 6'5", 265 pounds. And I found my strength being very strong, especially bucking bells, pounding fence, growing up as a kid. You know, you do what you got to do. A lot of it started back from when I was in foster care from birth to age 4. And then all of it comes full circle, going in from age 4, adopted at age 4, went back into care at age 12. Not knowing the circumstances, I ended up meeting my family for the first time, just actually about 3 or 4 years ago. I did not know my mother and my father. My mother died of cancer. She was what you would call a very sexually creative woman. That's a better way to say it. I am the oldest of 4 kids on her side, and I'm the youngest of 4 kids on my father's side. My father's side is 100% Jewish, Ashkenazi Jewish. So I actually met with them in Tornado Palms. So it was really cool to see all of them in person and put the story face to face. It actually gave me the direction of why I am and the personality I am today. I'm a very tenacious person. I do not back down, which is not always a healthy situation. And then I found myself in a position where I've always had a servant heart leadership mentality. And so what I did is I ended up doing something very different. I had sent in 67 letters of recommendation to the White House just when the Trump administration started. And I had got chosen for a few positions. The timing was not good for a couple of them. So I ended up getting an opportunity to work with Secretary Ben Carson, Dr. Ben Carson, who I found to be one of the best men that I've ever got to know personally and professionally. Worked with a fantastic team. I felt the privilege to work with some of the best and brightest minds in the country, and the most, I would say, understanding, intentional, deliberate individuals, to make sure when it came down to policy, it was done with a methodical approach, so that would not be taken away by the next administration, no matter who they were. And I was also the national lead to foster youth independence under Secretary Carson. So I toured a lot of the different cities, states, different rounds of different individuals. That was a standalone voucher program that was for youth aging out of the foster care system. There's about 23 to 24,000 youth each year aging out of the foster care system, which there's really no permanent landing zone for them. Found myself in different areas. I've owned companies, still do, that are called Breakthrough Incorporated, that serves populations of youth from ages of 6 to 21 that are autistic, schizophrenic, bipolar, a really tough behavioral emotion disturbed youth. And then I have a different company in Pierce County, Washington, which is called Steadfast Supported Living, that supports IDD, individuals with developmental disabilities that are more severe and profound, that actually have a family that can actually help with them under voluntary services placements agreements. Really tough population, but worthwhile. There's about 37,000 individuals waiting for housing with people that are disabled right now in Washington state. So I got hired with Washington Trust September 1st of last year. It's been over a year now, and to focus on homelessness, mental health, addiction, vocational programs, kind of the mix of things that actually is complexing the challenges of housing, stability, self-sufficiency, a lot of things that I think everyone is trying to figure out how to talk about. Anybody who has children or grandchildren, I say it this way: we raise our children to have a moral compass. We raise our children to have a work ethic. We raise our children to put family first. We raise our children to have a belief and conviction as something higher than them. And we hope that our children will model after people to be servant leaders in any way. I mean, even in the smallest form, it helps. So I think moving forward to my position at Washington Trust, which is called the Community Solutions Advisor, we've done that now over a year. We have all the information we publish on our website, so it's free. One of the things that's very unusual, Washington Trust Bank, which is in Idaho, Washington, Oregon. It's a privately held bank. It's been 120 years, probably a little over 1,100 employees, had decided to take this on professionally because they felt that there was nothing being addressed, and who else would do it because nobody else is stepping up. So the leaders, which would be Pete Stanton, who's the chairman and CEO, and Jack Heath, president, both very compelled to doing what's right for a community. And they felt that the need that they needed to invest in this to do so, which, in a lot of ways, I was shocked when they gave me the phone call. Wasn't a done deal the first time. And I was really surprised. So when I actually met with them the second time and talked to them about what I believe should be done, and they agreed, they said, yeah, let's do it. So, I talked to Jack, and the rest is kind of history. So we put a lot of energy. We've got an RJ Barry report, which is on our website, which is a good platform for how cities could do things. You need to utilize your resources for your housing authorities, your nonprofits, your for-profits, your builders, your banks, your financial institutions, your philanthropy side. You need to put them all together with the activists, advocates, try to figure out common ground. That's the biggest thing. The federal government has a policy which is called Housing First. Whether you like it or not, it is there. And it's how you work with it and around it to develop something that's unique to your city is probably the best approach, if not, I would say is the best approach. And affordable housing in today's world is, as you know, Montana, it's really hard. Just like anywhere in Spokane, the prices are going up. It's a shortage of labor, the cost of material, the cost of time to get it done, the policy which impedes your local governments on your zoning for building. I've encountered different cities and municipalities throughout the country that do things, what I would say they learn from the past mistakes of others' leaders. Houston does a fantastic job. Atlanta does a good job. San Antonio does a good job. I would say the number one thing besides politics, because it always is in the front of everything, is policy. And if people can look at the policy you have for what you would call growth management, because everybody knows without capitalism, there is no money to give to nonprofits. People have to remember that. Capitalism is not bad. It's fantastic. You have to have capitalism to give. You cannot expect a government to carry the weight for the entire state or city or county or country. It has a purpose. It has a role. We need to navigate those waters to where it's something that is actually beneficial for the community at large. And we think one of the things I found, my background complemented HUD. HUD is, when you think about HUD, it's a very unusual organization. It's one of the federal organizations that I would say, anytime there is a natural disaster, behind FEMA, they're number 2 in line. That tells you that anytime there's development, there's highways, there's education systems, any of the above, HUD is going to be there. You've got community public development, you got community CDBG grants. We've got a lot of things that as you know, as a city councilman or former, you know that there's a lot of dollars out there that you could get for grants to pay for buildings, which would help save the budget from the city, and it could be actually used in different areas, whether it's fire or law enforcement or mental health or addictions or social services, whatever it might be. But the pair of having everybody join forces together, you do not have to agree philosophically, politically. I will just say it that way, real bluntly. You know, after serving in the Trump administration and Dr. Carson, but also having grown up on the foster care system and seeing the trafficking, the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, a lot of the things that goes with it. I don't need to go into detail. You guys all understand that. Is that there are social service programs you absolutely have to have. If you don't like those programs, then you make it to where the policies have sunset rules, to where you can measure at the end of the point of time that policy or that time period, were they effective and how well did they actually operate? It's kind of like Job Corps. Whether people like Job Corps or not, it worked perfectly for me. You know, so I had an opportunity to learn 5 trades, and I still carry that with me today. But I think the biggest thing is how you partner with people, how you partner with every aspect of your community, whether you're Democrat or Republican or independent. If you don't find a common consensus to come together, it's going to be harder and harder, and the problem compounds itself. And then it's going to be harder to dig out of that position to where you're in currently. And that is the number one thing I see currently in different areas. That is the issue that's plaguing Spokane right now. You know, we have individuals who have an agreement they want to go one way, we have another way. We have one of the largest encampments in the state, if not the largest, on the Department of Transportation property. We're trying to find solutions to get people into whether it's PSA, permanent supportive housing, or temporary housing, or shelter. You know, we call it the track center. You can call it a different name, call it wellness center, call it a vision center, whatever it is. But you give people an opportunity to move forward for a pathway of self-sufficiency. Their story is going to be different than yours. Their story is going to be different than mine. Guaranteed that it's going to be different. So, but it's how you work with kind of that paint palette of getting people to work with each other, find commonalities, have them understand there's differences, have them understand, yes, there's conservative values, there's less conservative values, but if you can remove the politics, that's the first thing that has to be done. So if you're going to agree on the community standards in which you live, which there's a social rule of law, there's accountability, there's measures, there's standards, there's quality of life for all. There is nothing wrong with that approach. And people can come together with that. I've seen it day in and day out. I had seen it pretty heavily in California, and yes, I worked with the most infamous individuals that you see on the news out of California, but there was some of the most mutual respect. I never once felt, or was I ever put in a position to where I felt compromised. And I think that those individuals knew I would hold them accountable, and they were professional from the time I walked in to the time I saw them at the next meeting. And I know that HUD has some of the most intelligent minds there is, especially, you know, in their PD&R, their research. So they have folks that are meticulously reaching this stuff. So I would heavily rely on those folks if you can. But I would rather not keep talking, so I'd rather just take questions.
Chris, well, the neat thing, and what I love about listening to you and even reading your writing, is that you are always looking at the positive and saying, we just need to work on this together. And I think the approach that really strikes me most is that it's not a political solution. And the issue that I always saw at our city level, and I think we're a microcosm of every macrocosm out there. Everyone wants the government to solve it. And the government is part of the solution. I think they can be a facilitator, but they're not the solution engine. The solution engine, and you mentioned it, is the free market. And the free market does 2 things. You mentioned it. That's where the 501c3s, you know, it's our giving, it's our philanthropy that funds that. But it's also what funds the tax dollars for those programs, and HUD and FEMA and all the rest. So it's twofold. We can't be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And that's what that antagonism, when you've got the political sides, there's that us versus them thing. But we're looking for the same solution. And I'm gonna circle back to this a little bit, because you were interviewed on one of the, I think, your local news channels, and they were talking about Camp Hope. And from my understanding, because we have one in Missoula as well, I think it's called something different, but it was an area where homeless people just basically set up camp and lived. Am I correct in that understanding?
Yeah, what we have here, we have a Camp Hope. It's what they call it. It's well-intended individuals trying to figure out a way to make sure and protect the individuals who are in a really tough position. So it's not a permanent solution. It's not I mean, to me, it's a very temporary situation where we have to do something different. And unfortunately, I think a lot of builders across the country, not just Montana, but in the state of Washington, we need to build more, but you can't build fast enough. And can you find it to where it's affordable? Can you find it to where they take Section 8 vouchers? Can you find public supported housing? Can you find vouchers to where the systems are actually with market value? That's really tough, because HUD does not reimburse for market value. And so in some ways you find yourself, well, you don't find yourself some ways, in most ways anymore, you look to the public-private partnership. You have to have that venture supporting each other, or the chances of success are harder. That's why you get developers and investors that know how to utilize tax credits. In some states are easier to work with. And it depends on the metropolitan areas, where the bigger cities, they figure it out. Smaller communities, I think, have a better chance if they can get the recipe from the builder. And it depends on your municipality and your city council and your past laws on how it can benefit things. The last thing you want to do is stop the dream for somebody else. And I think if you give the chance to the future generations to see that there is the adult in the room leading, and that they really want to push forward the right thing, and it's not politically in nature, although you have to deal with the politics, and it is what it is. You don't shy away from that. It's kind of like my wife says, well, Chris, you can't die on every hill. Well, this much I've learned later in life, but before, when I was younger, I was going to die on every hill. And I was going to leave a large portion of me there. But I think the reality is, it is methodical, intentional, deliberate knowledge from others that can tell you what they've done in the past, what they've done to help you avoid those pitfalls. And there's a lot of mistakes that other political leaders have done that can prevent us from doing things. And it doesn't hurt taking advice from other people, even if it is from the opposing side, from somebody who was in a position 20 years ago. Because you can see, like in Washington State, we have what's called the Growth Management Act. That is really crippling us to develop appropriate fast housing. So that's something the legislation is going to have to tackle here in Washington State. So I would imagine Montana has its own challenges. I haven't researched the laws a lot lately. I know that one of the things I'm working with too is called the Mountain States Policy Center. That is a new organization that just launched. I'm actually working with them as a board member. And ironically, Montana is one of the states that's being covered. So I know that we're looking at how we can find effective policy, not political leaders, policy that will help political leaders make decisions, because the policy is truly what drives a lot of the things that we could be staying away from. And it just takes, it depends on who's in the politics and what's going to get in the way.
Chris, that was Mountain States Policy Center?
Yeah.
Okay. I put that in the chat, and I also put in your Breakthrough Inc. Earlier. So if people want to refer to that and look into it, I think it'd be great. If you could speak for just a minute too, if you would, about, we've got a lot of people, we've got community members concerned, we've got faith-based organizations concerned with housing and homelessness and all the issues that that are tied into that, the social issues, mental health and drug addiction, et cetera. We know it's complicated, and we know that there are several fronts in this battle on this hill, right? That we're going to sacrifice ourselves on. But I found something, and I know you found it in your research originally when you had written a paper for the mayor of Spokane. And when I presented my findings, they were really echoed by your findings, which was people were working in silos, and that is really, because they were being protective of their grant money and their funds, and I'm sure job security, et cetera. I'm not going to go down that road, but people do have this protective nature and work in silos. And if you could explain how you're breaking that down, breaking those barriers and getting people to come together, that's, I think, where our solution lies.
I was actually going to make a sign when I worked for HUD, my Region 9 office, and my staff had actually, I said it so much that the staff was actually going to get a shirt for me to wear. Breaking eggs to make omelets. Because I would say, we got to break lots of eggs to make omelets. Sometimes you're the egg, they get broke. That's actually getting broken. So I think the biggest thing is looking at what's effective. Silo based does not help. I can tell you, after working in the last administration, this is me personally and professionally, I found more federal agencies calling me up. And once I reached out to them to say, hey, can we work on it, whether it's USDA, FEMA, agriculture, labor, SBA, energy, because all the federal agencies in the country have a responsibility to one agency. That's the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. So because they all serve and work with that, because housing and homelessness is part of that interagency agreement, they need to work with each other to prevent the bigger issue. And you look at frontlining, I'll say front end funding. I'll look at child abuse as an example. If we were to educate folks, and I'll say it in a different way that's more blunt, not every parent should be a parent. And just because you can have kids doesn't mean you should. That's more candid an approach, but that's coming from me as a personal person who grew up in foster care. I can say that because it's what I believe. And I think that if you can educate people ahead of time, you do the front end funding, there's a lot of, I'd say main front, I'm not sure the definition or how to say it, but if you do, it prevents a lot of individuals from coming down your system years later by putting them dollars in the education and the system to work ahead of time. So when there's things that take place, they've already been educated and they're less likely to have that opportunity pop up again where they end up in the system. It's kind of like reentry, recidivism. I'm working on some pilot projects now with some different judges here locally to try to get some things done on that. Workforce development, stigmas, stereotypes, background checks, the whole thing. I grew up I got in trouble as a kid. I was arrested as a juvenile, and I all those things were disclosed, so there's nothing hidden. But those are things I made mistakes with. But I had to find mentors that were willing to actually help. And that comes down to servant leadership, such as you and others who are in Kalispell that are going to be able to help prevent possible issues. A lot of it comes down to relationship. 98% of it comes down to relationship, the willingness to do a handshake. I don't care if you shoot shotguns, go elk hunting, go golfing, but you've got to find that common table to go sit with each other and discuss your issues and walk away with some sort of a palatable agreement to where we're going to keep doing this until we find out the solution that works best. I mean, a 60-40 win is a 60-40 win, especially when it becomes the social issues in your community. There's things that are challenging and they do compound, they do build up, and it does get worse if you don't address the issue at all. I kind of like the approach of ripping off the Band-Aid and just digging in and getting the infection out of the way so I can start dealing with the cure long-term and dealing with people. I think they find you more respectful. They find you more candid. They don't find you full of crap. There's less BS for people to worry about. They know you're a straightforward shooter, and that's how I believe to operate. And I think that the reality is when you deal with people on a really direct approach and a respectful approach where it's a handshake, hey, how you doing? That's how we created Hello for Good. helping empower lifelong opportunities. It's as simple as giving them a handshake and saying, hello, how you doing? Buy a coffee, go out and have a whiskey, whatever it is you're going to do that makes them come to the table, because you got to fit their characteristics to come to the table. And I've worked with a lot of different people, whether it's Hells Angels, Gypsy Jokers, Banditos. I mean, I grew up around a lot of those people growing up as a kid. You have to find a common alliance. It doesn't mean you're going to agree. And I think the reality is we're at a point in our lives and in our country where we need to find that common ground, and we need to figure out what that is. But it doesn't mean we have to trade our values. It doesn't mean we have to trade our convictions, and it doesn't mean we have to give up what we believe in. But it also means that we can be a better leader to the individuals we're probably going to see. We just don't know yet.
Well put, Chris. I think part of you hit it earlier when you talked about, what we want to teach our kids, the moral compass, the work ethic, family first, belief in, divinity, and being servant leaders. Part of what Jim and I believe is that we have to give back. Community service is huge for us, and any way we can find to give back and that pay it forward. And I really like your forward thinking that if you can stop or slow the spread of what's causing these issues, that's probably where we should be spending 50% of our time, and the other 50 dealing with the rest, because we have an obligation to the future to stop this. And I'm reminded of the comment you gave to the news anchor that was interviewing you, and they asked you what your thoughts were on Camp Hope. And you said 3 things. I wrote them down. Actually, I went back to the video, Chris, because it left such an impression on me. Because most people, if it was a politician, they would be saying, oh, well, it shows us that there's a big problem and we have to dive in and do all these things. And what you said was you found it uncompassionate, a lack of order, and how did we get this far? Those were your 3 comments. And so how did we get this far? We need to stop and evaluate and go back. And so all the things that you're doing give me so much hope, because it just makes sense. And we have to peel the Band-Aid off, like you said, and just look at it for what it is. Some of what we're doing is not compassionate, and some of it's not orderly. We're just doing it so that it feels good, or so that we can say we're doing something, whether it's ourselves as individuals, or whether it's a municipality. A Band-Aid approach isn't going to work. So I appreciate your candor so much, and you're just right down in the weeds. It makes such a difference. And I think the more we can do that, instead of glossing over it, just saying, yeah, we know there's a problem and there's more to it. I just think that goes so far.
I appreciate that. I'm not a politician. I've worked with a lot of respect. If I was a politician, I probably would be even more direct.
I think that's what we need.
Yeah, my wife reminds me a lot. Chris, you just need to remember who you're talking to. Is yeah, it's me. It's my legacy. It's what I believe. It doesn't mean I have to agree with them, but I can guarantee I'll find a common spot, and we'll walk away with something that we both are going to agree on. May not be what we both want, but it's going to be what we both agree on.
Right. Well, there are too many points of disagreement. And I think if again, it comes down to the silos. And, some people think, mental health is the answer. And some people think that addiction recovery is the answer. And some people think it's in the judicial thing. And some people think it's more shelters. And some people think it's more affordable housing. And that's their emphasis. But you mentioned it, that those are all tools in a toolbox.
Everything you just said is in the toolbox.
Right.
So it's not separate.
Right. And so the person who thinks their hammer is more important than the screwdriver, that's
right.
Where we get into those battles. And that's what I see collectively. Not just locally, but even nationally. People are so hanging on to what's important to them and thinking that it has a greater priority than all the rest. And
Yeah.
you're finding that common ground between those people. And I don't know how you're managing to bring all those pieces together to work together. I guess that's the missing ingredient that I'm wanting from you. How, is it just the reality? Just you are who you are, and say hello, be nice, and let's come together?
I'll say it in a different way. I'm Katie Bruyere is my boss at first. She's the SVP of Human Resources for Washington Trust Bank. And I remember the first time I met her, I said, "Hey, I just want to give you a heads up. I'm an absolute HR nightmare." And what I explained that to her, I said, "I don't follow rules. I follow the rules I'm supposed to, which are society's rules. But when it comes down to it, people want to have a straight shot discussion. They want to know you're not full of crap. They want to know you're going to own what you say. And they want to know you're going to show up when you said you're going to show up. And they want to know you're accessible when you say you're accessible." Even to the point when I was a regional administrator, I put my cell phone on my business card. I didn't put just my email, I put my cell phone, because I said I want to be accessible to when people actually want to get a hold of me, not just one of my staff. So I was rather unusual that way, because it's just, that's how I operate. I'd rather you call me directly. Not always a good approach, I can tell you that, because you get a lot of odd phone calls. but,
Might want to hear one of those.
yeah, but I can filter them out. I think the biggest thing is it just comes down to it's what I have to live on. When I meet my maker, either people are going to say one of two things: he was an absolute asshole, or he was on point. And I'm not afraid of either one.
Yeah. Well, just to be clear, Chris, assholes can be on point. Right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that's what it takes to make a point.
Yeah, I just think that people want to see something that's real. And
Right.
I think life is too short, and we have opportunities to do things that are necessary. And I'd rather just do that.
So let's talk real briefly about the nuts and bolts of how you're managing to do this. Are you meeting with the folks, the silo dwellers, one-on-one, or are you start there and then you bring them together at a table? What are the mechanics of how you're approaching this as a solver?
I am meeting with people that you would least expect. So I'm meeting with the extremely what would be considered liberal or far left individuals, and they're meeting with me. But I think that's not how we look at it with each other. We don't. We have a mutual respect. I mean, if I want to actually get to the nuts and bolts of something, I'm going to pick a place that's going to be beneficial for both. So I am going to go find a place that serves old fashions or scotch or whiskey or bourbon, and they want to drink beers, and we're going to go a place that does that. So we can sit there and talk about, okay, what's the problem with the policy with housing? Where the advocates and activists talking about the shortcomings? What we can do different? How's the workforce housing? What's the challenges to social services? How can we bring different things online? I'd rather hear it from them. So I will meet with individuals. I know we're going to be doing something, I think, on election night here in Spokane on the 8th for about an hour. And I'm meeting with two individuals who are least likely to be in my political camp. But I respect them both. I mean, I actually I enjoy spending time with them both. I don't have a problem with them. I can have no problem going out to dinner with them or having drinks or spending time with them. They'll ask me questions and I'll give them a straightforward answer. Maybe it catches them off guard a couple times. I know most times it doesn't, but it's straightforward. And I think that they know exactly where I stand, but I'm also going to be there when they need me to, and they give me a phone call on my cell and say, "Hey, I need your help." I'm going to be right there. And I think that that's why we're doing what we're doing. That's why it's successful, is because we're breaking bread with people that normally wouldn't be in the same room with each other. And that's how it works. Whether it's uncomfortable at times. I'm not going to say it's not, probably for both of us or anybody of us in the room, but I've never had a problem with meeting with anybody. I think most of the times, if not all the times, it's been very genuine. You're always on guard in the back of your mind saying, okay, what's really going on? What's their motive? But I fed through that pretty fast. and I just get straight to the point. So that way there's no time to guess. And we all know that there's the issues we're seeing in our cities, our counties, our states for the issues that are important to us. I'm not there to discuss all those issues. I'm there to discuss the topics at hand, and that is, how do we make people connection with vocational? How do we get them for housing? What's the policies? What are the challenges? What are the issues? What are the policy or politics behind it? We just go straight at that stuff. I don't waste time on things that I don't control, and nor will I. So I don't need to go near areas that have nothing to do with what we're doing for Hello for Good. And that's what makes it easier. We just simply, I've had people try to send me emails, hey, are you guys taking a stance on this? And I says, we have nothing to do with that. Have a good day.
Excellent. Yeah, that's part of the issue I had, or the struggle I had, being a public servant. There are things you can and can't say, and people come to you with certain expectations, and then when you tell them, well, that's not in my wheelhouse, you know, if you want to change that policy, you've got to go to the state. So take this up with the state legislature, not your local city council. I think part of it is people don't want to hear, they want your ear, but they don't want to hear where they've got to go to really, you know, voice those complaints. And we can take it upstream, but that's not what we are hired to do. That's not what we were elected to do.
And I'm happy to I'm happy to connect them via email, join emails with them so that they're on there. Hey, this is the discussion, this is the topic. So it kind of introduces them easier. I find myself in different discussions with different people, but I remind them that's not what I'm there for, but I'm happy to help them connect to other people who are. So I don't just abandon them and say that's not my job. I don't say that. I just, well, how can I help you? If I don't have the information, I'll find somebody else who does. Rather than just dropping the ball. And I think that's what is helpful. It's not always the success you hope for, because, you know, sometimes you just don't make everybody happy, and that's just the reality of the world.
Right. And you know, quite honestly, I do want to make everyone happy. that's part of what I want. I want, you know, what the Miss America, you know, world peace. You know, I would like everyone to be happy. That is on my agenda. I know, Jim, you were on your way back from an emergency school board meeting. If you want to ask any questions, or James, I appreciate you being on. If you've got any questions for Chris, otherwise I'll be respectful and let him get in a hot soaking tub, maybe sounds like you had the real work-out.
Yeah, I'll show you so that way I won't leave you guys hanging.
Oh yeah, please. Oh, wow. Very nice.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was I actually forgot to count the points. I got so excited I just pulled the trigger.
Zoom in on it and count them now.
Yeah.
That's a great
Hey, Rod.
accomplishment. Yes, Jim.
Rod. So Chris, I just wanted to thank you for being on the call tonight. I apologize I wasn't here for the beginning of it. It's the great part about us recording these calls. I'm sitting in the parking lot at the school just so I couldn't miss any more. But thank you for what you're doing. It's interesting because I spent most of my life in that place we call California, and it's admirable that you were able to get along with some of those folks that we all reference out there that seem to be challenging. But I understand when we're aligned to try to get the jobs done in our cities, it's important that we do that. I like your bluntness and your candor and your ability to call a spade, because I think we need a lot more of that. Like Rod said, we also need that in our politicians. And I think it's important, especially for our members or people that listen to these calls, that they hear that you're having success with your approach. And, you know, you rattled off some of the biker games that I grew up around in San Bernardino. My father was a sheriff, so pretty familiar with a lot of those gangs. But you know, what's interesting about those types of people is they also want to get stuff done. They live there too. They have their own families and ways of doing things. And so you have to get along with all sorts of people. And then finally, you know, we always, it's amazing as a society, we get to that point where we say, well, how did we get this far? You know, most of my adult life, I lived in Newport Beach. And if you're familiar with that disaster we had in the Santa Ana River Jetty with homeless encampments, thousands and thousands of people in the wealthiest county in the world, literally. And we're looking around going, how did this happen? right? So I love the work that's being done and the lessons here. So this is a very valuable call. We'll put the pieces of the puzzle together for you with our network, and I wouldn't be surprised if some people didn't reach out because the value that's here. And Rod, I want to close by saying on my side, and you can wrap the meeting up. James is on the line. I see. James, I just want to wish you the best of luck. Next time we talk, it's election night, so we won't have this call. And I just want to wish you the best of luck in the position that you're searching for. But what a great call tonight going into this final week, understanding what's important, and the policies that you might be able to institute to give people like Chris and others the tools needed. So again, Chris, thank you. I appreciate you.
Yeah. And I think I told Rod before, I'm happy to come to Kalispell. I do have friends there. Unfortunately, Mark Johnson is one of them. And I do have other friends that, like I said, I've got friends of all walks of life, but I'm happy to come down there and help however you guys see fit.
Well,
Appreciate that.
I know, thank you again. I do know that Mayor Johnson and the council did have a work session with a lot of the 501c3 people. I was going to say silo dwellers, but I won't. They did have a work session, and again, not much was accomplished because it's, well, what do you want us to do? But you would be great at a work session like that, just to get the community involved and have that outside perspective from a national scale to a larger city scale that is getting accomplished goals. And that is what we all need to focus on. The work that can be done can get done. So anyway, Chris, I'm gonna wrap up here. Thank you again, Jim. I'm glad you hopped on there at the end. Chris, if I come up with any other questions, I'll email you or call you back. But I want to thank you again for your time. Most appreciated. And again, this lives for posterity. So again, for all of the people out there who are going to be watching this later, well worth our time and effort. Chris, thank you again for your service.
Thanks, man. Take care.
You bet. Bye-bye. Good night, everyone.